In this video, we're going to talk about scene lighting. This is the most important subject of the whole visual arts. Because without lighting, this is exactly what we would see inside our painting. Without getting too deep here, we're going to talk about light and perception. We're going to see some basic theory of lighting and some basic knowledge of scene lighting, introducing the concepts of simple and composed scene illumination. At the end, we're going to talk about scene point of view and lighting consistency. As we have seen, a representative painter working with a bunch of color stains is able to create the perception of something real. We also have seen that we're going to perceive that image as bidimensional. But the scene itself that we represent can be bidimensional or three-dimensional, and the light plays a big role in this game. Let's say, for example, this lemon. This is definitely a bidimensional representation that probably also a child would be able to draw. But for us, this image is the theoretical extreme of a lemon which has been illuminated with a very strong and diffuse light, so that every part of it gets fully illuminated. Now, if we start reducing the light intensity while it gets down, we start to see appearing some detail. And if we keep reducing it, we can actually see the lemon pretty well, although it still looks quite bidimensional. If we slowly start to reduce the diffusion of the light in order that at the end we get only a single light coming from the top, we can see that this has become a three-dimensional image. This shows us that at the end the lighting we choose has a very big impact on how we're going to perceive our scene. If we want to see every detail, we may want to choose a very strong and diffuse light coming from different angles. But in this case, our scene becomes pretty flat with a low number of colors. If we want more deepness, we may want to use a medium intensity single light. In this way, also the number of colors will increase. There is another aspect of the human perception where we can eventually work on, and it's on the lighting effect on our mood. So, if we want our painting to be perceived as relaxing, we probably want a warm light, not very strong and not very diffused. A candle light would be very relaxing. If we want it to be very energizing, we probably want a light very strong and very diffused. If we want it to be sad, we may want to use a cold light, very diffused but not really strong. So, working on the lighting, we can not only set the deepness and the color distribution of our scene, but we can also try to induce in the person who watches our painting a specific type of mood. Now that we have a better idea on how the lighting may influence our scene, it's time we start seeing how we can control it. We have already started introducing some fundamentals about lighting when we have seen how to set our working space up. All the concepts that we have seen there about point light source, spotlight, and light temperatures are also valid here. The only difference is that this time we are not going to use them to see what we are doing, but to let other people see what's inside our painting. As first, we're going to start seeing what happens when a white light flux hits an object made with an opaque material with a matte external surface placed in a complete empty area in the complete darkness. For example, this sphere. we can see that we have one side which is pretty bright and another side which is completely dark. And this is valid for any object made with a similar material placed in the same situation. From now on, we're going to call this the bright side of the object and the other the dark side. In this specific case, the only difference that we're going to have between a point light source and a spotlight is a difference of intensity. Because as we have seen, most of the light of a point light source get lost in other directions, while in the spotlight the light flux get reflected in a specific direction. Now, if below our sphere we put an opaque matte flat surface, we can notice two things. The first is that our sphere casts a shadow. The second is that the colors distribution inside the sphere change. And we can start to see something also inside its dark side. This because the plane casts a reflected light very diffused. From now on, we will call direct the light that we will use to illuminate our scene, and indirect the light reflected by the other objects inside of it. We're going to talk about this later. For now, let's focus on the shadow. If we remember when we have talked about light, a white light flux is nothing else than a bunch of photons that belong to the visible band, and they all travel in the same direction. We have also seen that according with how we tickle them, they react sometimes as a wave and sometimes as a corpuscle. So, when a light flux strikes our object, we will have a certain number of photons hitting its external surface and bouncing, and other missing it. As we have seen, if these last are close enough, they get subject to its gravitational field and they change their trajectories. So, theoretically, a light flux should cast a cylindrical shadow. But in a real light flux, thanks to the diffraction, the shadow tends to become a cone behind the object, and in this area the concentration of photons decrease. To make it simple, the shadow casted by our sphere is pretty sharp where the plane is close, and it becomes a fading while the distance increases. Let's go back now to talk about indirect lighting. As we have seen, when the light hits an opaque object, the object reflects the waves with the wavelength somehow close to its color band and absorb the others. We have also seen that the reflective flux intensity and direction depends on the incident angle, on the material, on the shape, and on the external surface finishing. In the case of a matte surface, the reflecting light is very diffused, normally visible only inside the dark side, and it has the color of the reflecting surface. In this case, for example, the bottom plane, which is a light gray, reflects a light that helps us see pretty well inside the dark side of our sphere. But if we use a dark plane instead, the indirect light becomes less intense, and our vision in the dark side almost disappears. By our point of view, this light is really important because it will help us creating the perception of our object shape also in the dark side, generating a complete three-dimensional view. Now, if we add another plane behind our sphere, this is what we would see using a spotlight, and this is what we would see using a point light source. We have seen that according with the angle with the external surface, the light will bounce in different directions with different intensities. This leads us to the concept of point of view. According with the position where we watch our scene from, we're going to see it with a unique colors distribution related with the quantity of reflected light bouncing in our direction. So, for example, if we watch our sphere from this point of view, we see the dark side pretty well, but we have a limited vision of the bright side. Well, from here we can actually see both sides almost equally. From this other point of view, we can see most of the bright side and a very small slice of the dark side on the bottom. A bad situation for us is when we can control both lighting and point of view. For example, like in this studio scene, where we can choose the best point of view and we can arrange the lighting in the way we want. But for a representative painter, unfortunately, it's not always so simple. For example, if we decide to paint a landscape, according with the point of view that we choose, we may have to wait the right moment of the day, or even more than one day, to get exactly the colors distribution that we want. And sometimes we may never get it. So, in our scene setup, lighting and point of view are two parameters that are not independent. And it's our job choosing the best combination to represent our scene exactly like we want it. What we have seen so far is what we will call a simple illumination, where we're going to illuminate our scene using a single light. But we may decide to use instead what we will call a composed illumination. In this case, we're going to set more than one light with different intensities and directions, where every light is going to work in a different way on every part of our scene, so that at the end we can get exactly the lighting effect that we want. We're going to see some examples now for both of them, playing with different types of light and reflectors. Let's say that our scene is composed by a single blue coffee maker, hanging in a complete empty and dark area. If we're going to light our subject with a single spotlight coming from the top right corner, this is what we're going to see. We have got our bright side here on the right, where we can see some details of our subject, but on the left, inside the dark side, as we could expect, we can't see anything. It's completely dark. Now, as we did before, we're going to put our coffee maker on a flat surface. And exactly like we could expect, thanks to the plain indirect lighting, we start to see something also in the dark side. Now, if we add another plane on the left, we start to have a complete view of our coffee maker. If we add on the back a third plane, it doesn't change much for our subject, but thanks to the indirect lighting, the background becomes a little bit brighter. Adding a plane on the left isn't the only way for us to see inside the dark side. We can use instead a spotlight pointing straight there. But in this case, if the light is too strong, the dark side practically disappears. We can keep it like this if we want, but since a dark side will help our painting to look more three-dimensional, we are going to reduce the intensity of this light until it looks exactly like we want it. In this case, the difference by using an indirect light reflected by a plane to work on the dark side or a direct light emitted by a lamp, it's that with the plane we can only reflect a certain amount of light, but very diffused. If we want to increase its intensity, we have to increase the intensity of the main direct light, or move our plane closer to our scene. And this is not always possible. While creating an indirect light effect by using a spotlight, we can control the intensity independently from the main illumination, but on the other side, the direct lights are normally not diffused as much as the indirects. Let's focus now on our scene background. It looks pretty dark. If we keep it in this way, most of our painting will be black. If we like it, it's fine. But if we don't like it, to avoid the problem, we can use a plane as a background with a spotlight to illuminate it, and according with the light intensity, we can create different effects. This is just an example on how our scene can change using a simple or a composed illumination. The scene lighting, it's a very powerful tool that we have because, as we said, it can help us, the people who watch our painting, to get the right feeling. The research of the best point of view and of the perfect lighting should be a very important part of our painting definition, and we should really consider spending time on both of them. The last concept that we want to discuss is what we will call the scene point of view and lighting consistency. Normally, this isn't a problem if we use a model, because by using a model, theoretically, we should already have fixed both point of view and lighting. But if we paint by memory, or we decide to rework our scene adding a new subject, or we paint the same scene in different times, and every time we have to reset our scene up, we may get some problem. In these cases, we have to make sure that all our scene subjects are represented like if we watch them from the same point of view and like if they are illuminated from the same lighting. Of course, for example, in this case, everybody can see that the cup has a different point of view, and in this other case, that its illumination isn't consistent with the rest of the scene. But if our mistake is not so evident, we may not perceive it immediately, and our scene at the end becomes inconsistent. With this last consideration, we have concluded our discussion on the scene lighting. In the next video, we will talk about reflections and transparencies. If you enjoyed this video, we will really appreciate if you could click on like and subscribe to our channel. It will also help us very much if you could leave a comment. Thank you for watching this video and see you in the next one.